Hello and welcome back. All right, so we're going to do some dodging and burning on this particular image. It is in the resources folder that you downloaded at the beginning of the course, so you can download that and practice what you learned from this lesson once you're done going through it. So here's some examples of when you might want to use the dodge and burn tool. Let's say that in the shadows of your image, you want to bring out more detail in those areas. So what we can do is use our dodge tool to brighten up this area, and that will show more detail when you brighten it up. So these tools give you the precision and control to apply edits locally or exactly where you want them within the image, because if we were to try and brighten up this area with an exposure adjustment, it would apply that exposure adjustment to the entire image. But with the brushes, you can brush them on exactly where you want them. Then in the sky, if you want to make certain areas darker, you can use your burn tool to make it darker. So let's go ahead and start with our dodge tool and bring out some details in the rocks. Once you have the tool selected, you can then adjust your brush size with your bracket keys in order to cover a larger or smaller area. Right now I have a small brush and it's going to take forever to go through and cover the entire area. So if I use my right bracket key, I can make that brush larger. My left bracket key makes it smaller. So I'm going to make it fairly large, and I also want to make sure that I have a soft edge around my brush. Otherwise, it's not going to blend in very well. So I'm going to bring this down to around 25%. It's just going to take some time to figure out what edge brush is going to work for you and your images. And I find anywhere from 0 to 50% will work most of the time, and I will fluctuate that adjustment as needed as I'm working. Now, the other thing we want to do is we want to work non-destructively. We do not want to apply this edit on our background layer. Otherwise, that's going to permanently change that particular file once you save it as a JPEG file. Then if you decide you made a mistake and you brought out too much detail and it looks fake, then you're stuck with that edit and you'll never get your original image back. So let's go ahead and duplicate this layer with our keyboard shortcut, which is Command or Control and the letter J. Now that we have a duplicate layer, we can apply our dodge tool here as well as our burn tool, and then we can save it as a PSD file so we can re-edit it later on. Okay, I have my range set to highlights right now. Yours is probably midtones. If you haven't changed it yet, that's the default setting. But we can also select shadows if we want to adjust the shadows more than the midtones. So let's try it out with the midtones first with our exposure set to 50. So when I go to apply it, it doesn't look like it's doing much because we are applying it to the midtones, and we have to continue clicking and dragging out new brush strokes in that area in order to bring back that detail. But that might be a good thing if you want to bring back that detail gradually. And you can see the more I apply new edits, it's starting to bring back more and more detail, and that may be exactly what you want to do. So let's go ahead and turn off this layer, and now you can see that that detail has come back. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off, and I'm going to create a new background layer, and this time I'm going to change it to shadows for the range. I'm going to keep exposure set to 50%, and then I'm going to apply it, and you're going to see that it's applying the edit a little bit more the first time around than it did with the settings set at midtones, and now I have a second brush stroke, and now a third. So it's applying the edit differently based on the tonal values that we selected in the range dropdown. It's just a matter of deciding which one you like better. Personally, I like this because it gives a little bit more contrast to the image, because it's not really making adjustments to the harsh, dark, black shadows, and that's why we have much more contrast in here versus this one here that looks much flatter, because we are adjusting the shadows more than the midtones. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this one off and leave this one on. And now we'll go ahead and apply the burn tool to the sky but we'll go ahead and do it on a separate layer as well so we can see the differences between midtones and highlights. So let's go ahead and duplicate this layer again with Command or Control and the letter J. Let's set this to midtones. Actually, we need to select our burn tool first, and we need to set that to midtones. Increase the brush very large to cover the majority of the sky with your right bracket key, and then we're just going to paint over. The only problem is I'm not liking the edge of the brush, and it's a little bit too hard. So again, we need to make sure that we're adjusting the hardness of our brushes when we switch tools, because it's going to remember the last settings that you had when you used that tool last. So now it's going to blend in a lot better, and we can see that the sky is now starting to get darker wherever I apply that brush stroke. All right, I'm going to duplicate the layer again. Let's turn this one off, and this time we're going to apply highlights. So now you can see that the effect is a little bit darker than it was previously. So it does give you a completely different result. And in this case, I wouldn't use 50 on the exposure. I would probably choose something around 15 to 25. That way, it's not going to make it as dark as it is with 50%. So if we compare that to the tonal range of midtones being selected, we can see that the highlights is much flatter. So that's why by default we have midtone selected, because most of the time that's going to give you the best results, because it's not going to make that area flat, and instead it's going to keep some of the tonal range in the shadows and the highlights, which creates that contrast to make our images pop. Otherwise, it's just way too flat. I'm not liking that at all. I prefer this particular edit here with the midtones being applied from the burn tool. Now just keep in mind, this is not how I edit my images either. These are just the basics showing you how to use these tools, and I recommend grabbing this file and applying the dodging and the burning in the different areas, adjusting the ranges, and then reapplying them in those areas to see how it affects your images, because it's going to be much easier and quicker for you to learn how these tools are going to affect your images when you start using them. So as part of your exercise, before moving on to the next lesson, practice what you've learned, and then in the advanced section of this course, you're going to learn the proper way to edit your images from start to finish. I'm going to give you my 3-step editing workflow, and I'm going to share with you additional tips and techniques for editing your images properly. So once you're done with your exercise with these two tools, we're going to work with our sponge tool on an image as well in the next lesson.